All right. Hey, welcome, Riverbend. Thanks for joining us tonight at Everything Matters. I have my guest, Stephanie Rollins, my buddy, John Jolet. And as always, Kevin's over here and Jake running the video and the sound over there. Thanks for joining us. If this is your first time joining us on Everything Matters, I'd like to give you a little description so you understand kind of why Everything Matters and why we call it the show. So growing up, for me, I grew up in a pastor's home, spiritual kind of place. Everything in my life was kind of based around spiritual stuff. Read the Bible, pray, good things, really good things. But as I got older, I started to realize there was more to life than just those things, especially when I became a pastor, which is kind of weird. There's not only the spiritual things, but also the practical and the emotional. And as I started to meet with people and be a pastor and connect with people, I started to realize that God was weaving in and out of all those different things of the spiritual, emotional, and the practical. And see God in art and in discussion and in movie and all these different places where God was kind of like pouring out and things. So that's where the name Everything Matters comes from. So there you go. So tonight we're going to continue our series on this idea of peace. And so this concept of peace is so hard to define. It's so big and it's so weird and crazy. We're going to get a little nerdy tonight, okay? That's a little bit of we're going to talk about Epicureans and Stoics and how it relates to some of the biblical stuff, and really kind of talk about how we deal with a society as peace. So last week we were a little bit more on a personal kind of note. We're going to get a little more corporate tonight and kind of get into that. So thank you guys for joining me for the discussion, and we're having a good time tonight. I want to give a little of the premise that hopefully will help us get in this discussion. But the idea for me is this idea tonight's peace through retreat or engagement. Let me give you a little bit of background as we get into this. Had you guys heard of Epicurean and Stoic before I sent some of the stuff to you? Is this like...
Heard of it, yes.
Heard of it, but never kind of delved in it.
Yeah.
We talked about it Sunday a little bit.
Yeah, and we talked a little bit about that in philosophy class in college.
For sure.
That was, a year or two ago.
So those are big concepts, but I want to kind of wrap them up together. So there's a scripture, Acts 17, 16 through 18. I think we have it on the screen there, so you can kind of see a little bit of the premise tonight. This is Paul in Athens. Says, while Paul was waiting for them in Athens, he was greatly distressed to see the city was full of idols. So he reasoned in the synagogue with both the Jews and the Greeks, fearing Greeks, as well as in the marketplace day by day with those who happened to be there. A group of Epicurean and Stoic philosophers began to debate with him. Some of them asked, "What is this babbler trying to say?" Others remarked, "He seems to be advocating foreign gods." They said because Paul was preaching the good news about Jesus and the resurrection. So that's kind of where this starts out, this idea of Epicurean and Stoic. But it really goes back a couple hundred years. Starts with a guy named Epicurus. That's where we get the name Epicureanism and the Epicureans. And if I can kind of help describe a little bit, there's this idea, their idea of peace was more retreating into saying, okay, here's all the problems that are going on over here with government, with things like this. Let's go over and be with our friends, and let's eat, drink, and be merry, right? That's one of the quotes we have. We may have that up there, which sometimes we take as a very hedonistic, like just go party. Kevin and I were talking about that before, but it really wasn't that. It was this idea of kind of retreating and saying, we're going to find peace with our friendships and with how we engage with people by, enjoying creation, but doing that together. But there was a sense that said, I'm going to leave all the stuff of the government and everything else and all the drama to you guys. And we're going to go over here. So you have that side of things. And then we have the other side of things, the Stoics. If you ever talked about Stoics, you have Seneca, you have Marcus Aurelius, these guys that wrote a lot about these things. There was a different way of talking about peace that was more about working on yourself, but there's a sense of engagement with your work, with your calling, with your duty of doing things, if you will, of really engaging with that kinds of stuff. And even if you're a soldier, whatever those things were, there's a sense of engagement. And that engagement would also be part of how they're wrestling and finding peace. So those are two little backgrounds we have for this kind of thing. So Epicurean and Stoics. Some of the premise I want to get into later on, if you're just joining us, we're talking about peace through retreat and engagement. But some of the stuff we want to get in a little bit on is about Peter and Paul, because I think they represent both of these kinds of different things. So for you guys to kind of start and for us to talk, do you see this, and you work in law, and you work, right?
Did, yeah.
Did, still have that in the background. You work in technology.
Mm-hmm.
I wonder from what you guys experience in life, do you see society gravitating towards these two kinds of schools of thought, even where you guys work and what you engage, or the people you hang with and spend time with?
Well, you know, from what I do, it's interesting because if you talk about meeting technological challenges, right? Meeting how do you overcome, you know, what we call technical debt and progress your company. They do kind of fall into that those two camps, right? You've got the people that are, you know, okay, this is a problem, we need to go fix it. And then you have the people that like, well, this is how it's always been, and there's really not much we can do about it, right? And from a technology perspective, you know, one of those is easier and one of those is more effective, right? And so it kind of depends on what you're trying to achieve. You can be very successful, profitable as a company without spending a lot on technology,
Right.
but it's very difficult to be profitable for a very long time without spending on technology.
So you see that, and you're already in your workplace.
Yeah.
That's really interesting. How do you see this play out in society at all?
Yes, the kind of law I practiced was prosecution. I was an assistant district attorney, and I specialized in child abuse cases. So you're, by just the job to start with, you're kind of already on a side that considers itself, I think, kind of out for the greater good.
Uh-huh.
You know, you're prosecuting the state's crimes, so it's just sort of in the job description. But one of the harder things to run up against are people who are also in the same job or law enforcement that should have shared the same values, that had a much more Epicurean philosophy where it was like, this is how it's always been, this is how it will always be.
Right.
I've seen this, I've been on the job for 20 years, I'm gonna do the bare minimum, put in my hours and check out. And so for somebody just out of school who was actually really passionate about what we were doing, it was so frustrating to feel like you were wanting to fight the fight and you didn't always have people on your team who felt like the greater good was even worth
Right.
the time.
I that's really fascinating. You guys both kind of see those places. I had this idea that I think this what humans have kind of been wrestling and migrating towards for thousands of years.
Yeah.
Like even before Epicureans and Stoics put name to it and put like, well, this is how we experience peace, how we kind of our worldview, if maybe is that, and this is our worldview. I think just this is something humans seem to be kind of migrating to both these spaces. I see history kind of play out that way.
Right.
We were talking a little bit earlier, before we get into some of the scripture stuff, about how we engage with even social media and how we see this kind of play out for both of you. I mean, tell me your thoughts on that. We had a good discussion about that, about what you engage with and don't, what you see other people do that kind of looks at Epicurean and Stoic that may give a little more color to this, if that makes sense, more practical. Yeah.
Well, I think it's kind of situational, right?
Yeah.
I would tend to think it's a bit of a fallacy to say that somebody fits over here or over there. Like we talked about earlier, at work, I'm very much engaged and confrontational and trying to change things. And outside of work, I'm very much more Epicurious, and I'm just going to go mind my own business and take care of my little garden
with
patch.
your crew, yeah.
Right, and so I think we have to be careful not to paint with too large a brush, because it really is very situational. Politically, I tend to not say a whole lot, but if we're talking about technology or something like that, I tend to do that. Right, so I think certainly for me, it's situational.
Yeah, for sure. Yeah, I like that we can't kind of paint, and I think it's good for a discussion as we get to this other part of this. It's probably not a good thing to say you're all this or all that. It's kind of a labeling thing. But you were talking about some of the
Yeah. Well, I don't know how much my opinion you want, because I have joined and then quit social media a dozen times in the last 5 years, trying to find what the right balance is.
You and like 80% of people on social media. I want this. No, I don't want this.
I mean, in some ways it's good, and in some ways it's horrible, and it's just a mess. So my engagement with it is super limited.
Yeah.
I think, and I was talking to you about this right before we started. Our women's community group is talking about this really interesting topic right now off this book called Nice. how we love to be liked and how God calls us to more. And it's by a woman named Sharon Miller. And she talks a lot about these sort of false virtues, like false courage. And I would consider some engagement, right, to be one of those things where it's like it's really just an act of boldness or maybe even recklessness or maybe even confidence or maybe self-care. And you're calling it courage. And it's not really Christian courage. It's not an act of love. It's not on behalf of others. And so in this specifically, like social media, I think engagement for the sake of engagement isn't necessarily the virtue, right? It's
Right.
Your aim, at least in this discussion, is peace.
Yeah.
And I don't see a whole lot of peace in the social media platforms unless I silence the majority of
Right.
the stuff I see.
But do you think
Just-
there's a certain part of someone who's saying, this is my pathway to peace is through engagement? Like they got to get it out. They got to get the message out. They have to like engage to get it off their chest or whatever else it is. Therapeutically, yeah.
Well, that's when you run into those, my rights end at your rights, right?
Right.
It doesn't really matter how I may find it therapeutic to go, kick puppies, but I that's not okay,
Please don't.
right? It's
don't-
not okay.
No,
Disclaimer,
don't kick
We
Don't
do
kick
not.
the crime for that
We
is
don't
animal
advocate
cruelty.
Yeah,
for
exactly.
kicking any
But,
puppies.
Yeah,
you know what I
Riverbend
mean?
does
Like,
not stand for
it's-
that. We're not doing that. Okay.
The point is,
Okay.
just because it's therapeutic for you doesn't mean it's okay.
Right.
Right. And that's why, I see some people, like you're saying, on social media where they're just out there, screaming loud noises like what's his name in Anchorman, right? And there's not a lot of meaning to it, and there's not a lot of depth there. They're
Right.
just making themselves feel better. And I guess it's okay as long as you're not hurting somebody. But
Right.
when you start to do that in a way that injures somebody in any way, then you're no longer have that right.
This
I have
though.
to say,
Go ahead.
it's been very rare that I've seen someone really proactively endorsing and working hard for peace in a non-judgmental, which we talked about 2 weeks ago. I should go back and watch that one. But we talked about, anyway, it's very rarely that I've seen a person that has just really sought to bring about peace through social media. They've always got an agenda and a judgment and an axe to grind.
Except Jimmy Carter.
Who?
Jimmy
Except
Carter.
Jimmy Carter.
Okay. I have not read anything. It could be true. It's
No,
just very rarely.
Right.
Well, I think we're talking about the social media part. I think there is a piece of it, and I don't know if this is true or not, but think of the idea to some degree. It's like peace through military force type of stuff. Like I'm gonna go do what I need to do to bring peace. I think there is a mentality in someone who leans more stoic that says, whatever the issue is, I'm going to bring peace
Whether you want
by force, if that makes sense. Like there's a part of it that is in that I don't agree with it, but I think that's where sometimes that comes from. Does that make sense?
Well, and how are you defining peace? Is peace,
Yes.
is that where you're going?
That's what I want you to do.
Great.
How do we define peace then? I think that's
I
part
don't
of the
know,
discussion.
because you have the Prince of Peace who came in the flesh and threw tables over in the temple and
Right. That wasn't very peaceful.
called
was
the
it?
Pharisees names and a whole bunch of things that I think you would,
favorite.
that you would question. Are they peaceful?
That's what I mean.
But he clearly is upholding the virtue of peace
For
as the
sure.
Prince of Peace.
Well, and I think there's this aspect of personal peace,
Mm-hmm.
right? Like I gave a talk in Sunday school about kind of solitude and peace and going off and camping and sometimes I like to just go camping by myself and I find that very peaceful and restful. That is personal peace. It has nothing to do with bringing about peace in the world,
Right.
right? So you have today, am I going to seek personal peace, or today am I going to try to work for peace in the world?
Well, and you have Jesus who both retreated and engaged.
Yeah,
Right.
we're
And
gonna get into
retreated
that.
frequently in order to engage.
So
Yes.
do
You
we?
speak of this Jesus person.
I know.
Well,
Am I-
before-
Who is this?
and we're going to get into some of the scriptures actually, so hold on to that. But I just want to ask you, so do we define personal peace different than corporate peace?
I think you have to.
I think you have to.
I think you
Okay,
have to,
so
yeah.
I think these guys are trying to figure out how to have peace corporately or within community.
Yeah.
And I think that gets it gets a little wonky.
But that's not the Epicurean thing.
Well, they would do it. They
would say personal tranquility is the highest.
Partly, but they did. There was a part of it there was definitely a part of their stuff that you do that with friends, with people you trust and love.
Towards self.
For sure.
My friends make me more tranquil, and therefore
Exactly.
I will pursue that.
Yeah, and I
but
think
that
that's,
to me is the crux of the issue. Is it's a pursuit of self, which at the end of the day is never going to be for the greater good.
not necessarily. Just think about it. If
Unless
everybody,
it's self-care.
if everybody went off and was peaceful, wouldn't we have global peace? I mean, wouldn't we have corporate peace
I would say
if everybody
Oh,
went off and was
interesting.
nice?
here's where you're onto something because
We roll right there. That's good.
I've been just grinding away, and I think this represents a lot of people who've just been really working hard and COVID closeted and just not having a lot of human contact. And then so you get worn down and you have episodes like I had yesterday, Aaron.
My brother.
Or I had this morning in Deeper Journey.
Yeah.
Where
Yeah.
you're not yourself. You're not your best self, I should say.
Yeah.
So, yeah.
Yeah, COVID and all the stuff has taken away a lot of peace
Well, and
from a lot of
Yeah.
communities and personally. Like we're experiencing. I think about this: the amount of what COVID has done to the world, and the emotional unrest that's happened from that. I think for entire communities. I mean, we've seen it play out where people are going in the streets in lots of different countries, different places for different things. So as a community, they're still going, how do we find
Right.
peace? And some of them are going, I got to go out and engage with this somehow. Others are going,
well,
"I don't
then
do
then
it."
we're back to Maslow, right?
There you
Then we're
go.
back to Maslow's hierarchy because it's very difficult to have the space for kind of this meditative mental peace when you don't know if you're going to have another meal today, right? So when you talk about global peace and corporate peace, there has to be, and this is where the Stoicism comes in, right? There has to be some activity by the corporation to meet the needs, the basic needs of the corporate body before you can rise to that personal peace level.
This is what I think the guys are wrestling through in Athens.
Mm-hmm.
I literally do. I think this discussion has been around for thousands of years. I think humans have been wrestling with it.
You know,
I really do.
The difference is if you look at Athens, I think some 25% of the people were slaves in Athens, right? So you had this enormous, doesn't count, doing the work. And I mean, if you look at the burgeoning of art and science in the Hellenistic period, a lot of that is built on the fact that now we had leisure because we had all these slaves to do all this work for us. Would you have been able to achieve that if you also had to go till the fields and do all that sort of thing?
Yeah. And that gets to the corporate idea of peace.
Yeah.
Is
Yeah,
it
do they count as
fair?
the corporate?
Yeah,
Right.
is it all that? I mean, if we get
Who
into
is us
fairness
and who is them?
and your law stuff. See, this is a good discussion, isn't it?
It's a great discussion.
Yeah, there you go. So here's what I want to do a little bit. And you guys are awesome. If you're just joining us, thanks for hanging. We got real nerdy about talking about Epicureans and Stoics. We're going to continue that a little bit. But here's what I want to do a little bit. I want to kind of shift a little bit to the New Testament because, and be a little more, I want to be a little bit more macro than like straight in. I think this subject kind of needs that. But you already jumped into somewhat maybe what Jesus was thinking about that. I think it's really relevant. But I want us to think about Peter and Paul. And you see these guys, I see these guys in this discussion as, and we don't want to paint people too broad of a stroke like you just said,
Yeah.
but for part of the discussion, I think it helps us to see them as kind of the edges of this, as Paul being more stoic and Peter being more of the Epicurean side of things. And here's a couple of examples I think will kind of accentuate that a little bit. So you look at Paul in Philippians 3. Do you have it up there, Jake? I can't see it here. Philippians 3. This is where he's talking about running the race to get the prize for the goal. There's a lot of this very stoic kinds of things to it that I'm working on myself for my calling and what I'm supposed to be doing. You can feel the stoicism. And even the fact of the matter that Paul lived his life in going to places and engaging with people. He was a tent maker for the purpose of engaging with people, engaging with culture. Everywhere he went, he goes right in the middle of the marketplace and starts going, hey, you, what do you believe? Hey, you, what do you think? This is what I think. Like everywhere he went, he did that. I mean, the guy was like, to me, as kind of stoic as you're getting in this kinds of stuff. As opposed when you look at Peter, you look at 1 Peter 1, he has this idea where he starts talking about be holy because God is holy, and stay away from some of these wicked things in the world. Like there's an element of like, let's kind of camp here, let's be together. I mean, if you look into Acts 2, when the first church first started, I think I have that scripture too. This is what Peter says: with many other words, he warned them and pleaded with them, "Save yourselves from this corrupt generation." Like, just get away from it. Those who accepted his message were baptized, and about 3,000 were added to their number that day. They devoted themselves to the apostles' teaching and the fellowship and the breaking of bread and the prayer. Everyone was filled with awe, with many wonders and signs performed by the apostles. All the believers were together and had everything in common. So the Epicurean, even though I don't think he decided, he like set out to do this, the Epicureanism led to monasteries, and then eventually kind of led to this. The early Christians were influenced by that, where they're like, we're just going to be together. It's the commune idea that we see in the hippie world too. So you see these two things going on in the Bible. You see these two guys kind of having this thing, to the point even where James at one point says, Peter, you go to the Jews, and Paul, you go to the Gentiles and go do your thing, and it's all good. So for you two, and for Kevin, for all you guys, have you seen the modern church go to a Peter side and a Paul side? Even how we're doing community and trying to find peace through our Christian community that way. Have you guys experienced those types of things where you have a pole to both sides? I think there's a case that there's both, but I think as humans we may go to both sides. Have you guys experienced that, seen that?
I think we've been here at Riverbend for 21 years now. And I think the texture and personality of Riverbend has changed over that time. While Riverbend has always been kind of this welcoming, open, it was very much a passive, come here and we'll welcome you. There wasn't a whole lot of missions going on 21 years ago when we first got here, right? So the kind of the personality of Riverbend has changed to be more, I think, of more the stoic kind of go out and do stuff. Right.
Do what you're called to do.
Yeah, stuff's not going to fix
what
itself.
You're made
go
to
do
do
stuff.
Yeah.
As opposed to let's all just come here and we'll accept you. That's awesome. But corporately, is that enough? Right? Is that really what we as Christians are called to do? And I think what I thought about when you were talking about coming off to the side was, I think it has to do with two different views of what people are capable of. Like if you're an alcoholic, you probably shouldn't go to a bar. You should probably go away from the bar, right? So that seems to be the view that you can't withstand the corruption if you're mixed with it. And I think that's some of why it's healthy to have different kinds of people, right? Some people can go and get in there and not be stained by the mud, and others are a little more susceptible to tripping, and maybe we ought to back off and keep to ourselves.
I hear you endorsing that churches can be successful and promote peace in both ways. That there's some churches that may benefit from, and this is a derogatory term, so I'm going to be careful, but a holy huddle, being within themselves. They might be with your illustration that you mentioned earlier of retreating and finding peace on their own, which allows them to do the work that they think they need to do, prayer, different things.
I think what I would say is churches need to have both within themselves, right? You need to have sets of groups that are kind of more withdrawn and more contemplative, and sets of groups that are going out and trying to change the world. And it's a Venn diagram, right? And like I said, situational. Maybe you fit into both of those. Like, I'm not a gregarious guy, right? I'm not the go out and shake people's hands kind of guy. But I've been on a number of mission trips with my wife, and
he's a forever logistics guy.
Best. But it's I feel it's something I need to do. It's not something that necessarily feeds me, right, from that perspective, but it's something that from a Stoic perspective, I need to go help get this done, right? Because it needs to get done, and I'm here, so let's go.
There's all these jokes that we're leaving on the floor right now about his mission trip preparedness, but we're going to go.
Well, see, and to that, like, you and I have traveled together and done mission. There's literally, for me, this idea of engagement and doing it together in the community that I do see as bringing peace.
Yeah.
Like I really, that has been a part of my journey. It's part of what I'm missing doing, honestly, over the last year. We can't travel, and it's been hard. We're doing it locally, which has been great. There's been like, oh, we do a mission trip here every week, basically. It's super cool. But the stoic in me totally connects with, and I have for a long time since I was a kid, like, this is it. And it's interesting to me when we go on a mission trip or we serve together some way, how people of all different backgrounds and ideas and political things, they come together for a purpose because there's something of purpose. And it does bring peace. It brings peace to that place, and it also brings peace to the community. It's fascinating.
And the people that are there serving or doing the thing brings peace to them.
Yeah, the amount of
beautiful.
peace that it kind of exudes from that experience, it represents like the purest form for me, maybe on earth, about how I see that playing out. But you even experience it different than I do.
Yeah.
Because even though we're both bald, we kind of
And have glasses.
we
and
represent
what
the other
else?
side of the
And
the
Apple
spectrum
watches
here.
with
There you
gray
go. We got it all
bands
going.
and
But
tennis shoes. Okay.
even you and your own personality
Yeah.
feel it different. But I think there's an energy from that does bring peace corporately, that is different than what I can do at home alone, by myself on the floor type thing, So there's something to it. And
I
that's
feel
what
like you're judging the Epicureans.
Yeah, you guys,
I
you
feel
Epicureans
that.
suck. Yeah, just joking.
Anybody else?
So let's get it. Have you guys experienced I said church tenure earlier. This is a really weird way to say it. But have you, in your church journey, your religious journey, your faith journey, I've got like 50 words for that one today.
I'm sorry. I don't mean to correct you, but
No,
that's
it's
the phrase
okay.
I like.
I'm going to get there eventually.
Church journey just feels ugh.
Yeah. It's good. Have you experienced the kind of faith group leaning one way or the other? Kind of hard, like where there was balance? Or have you even seen that where you go, you mentioned Holy Huddle, where maybe the stoic in me goes like, that's not good.
Yeah, that was not a good term to use.
What?
I retract that.
You retract the Holy Huddle?
Yeah, it's not. Yeah, that's just.
That does feel like 1985 a little bit, right?
It does.
But have you guys either experienced that or seen that, or how's your perception of that? It seems very clear to me in my head, but I'd love to hear what you guys think on that.
Repeat the question.
Do you see churches lean one way or the other, or more
Yes.
balanced?
Yes, and even just if we're going to talk about my faith journey, I come from a much more Bible Belt conservative evangelical place than I think Riverbend. And so I think I've come from a much more combative, go out into the world, change it, be the salt, be the light, till I think Riverbend is much more of a place of grace.
We're
is
here.
Yeah,
come
we're
hang with us,
here.
right.
You're welcome. Don't change a thing until you're ready, which I love. And I'm here intentionally because that is a breath of fresh air for me. But I think what all these, I'm just going to keep coming back to Jesus because that's the thing. I feel like they're all just reflecting back like fragments of his light. I mean, obviously, I don't think either school of philosophy is going to be all the answers because they're not him,
Right.
is how I see it.
For sure.
At its base, which I learned today, right? But Epicureanism is largely anti-theist, right? It's a non-God thing.
Adam, they talk more
And
about
it was like the seed to
the world being
atheism is my
Adam's, yeah.
understanding. And so I don't think there's going to be a whole lot of health to be found in taking that to its extreme of my tranquility is the dominant motivating factor to all the choices I make. Having said that, I think, like you were talking about self-care, until I get right, which is what our deeper journey does at Riverbend, until I can do the inward part and I can go be quiet and I can learn to love the company I'm keeping on my own, how much use am I railing against someone else's brokenness if I haven't found healing on my own? So there's obviously a place, a really important place in the church for people to get healing in the quiet, in themselves, in
Right.
the deepest places, in their families. And I don't think you have a whole lot of business ministering elsewhere if you're if your person or your home is broken.
Right.
So I think there is good in that, but ultimately, like Paul and Peter are members of the same body, which I think is kind of what you were getting at.
Right. They're all there.
Jesus picked them both.
All in the Bible there, right?
Yeah.
Yeah.
And before Jesus found either one, they were living out those same lives, right?
sure.
Peter was kind of a recluse, fishing, minding his own business,
Right.
taking care of the family life. Paul was out there railing against, as
Before
Saul
he became a Christian, he
was
was trying to kill the
railing.
Christians.
He was taking his platform to
Right.
the extreme because
For sure.
that's, and so I see this beautiful redemption story in both, that like God's just taking the men they already are, the men he made them to be, and the love stories he has with each one of them, and like taking that very thing that they are in their nature and
Yeah.
giving that life and giving that purpose in
For
him.
sure. Yeah.
And they both have benefit. And you need both, which I think is what you were saying.
That's exactly what I'm saying. You know,
Yeah.
it's kind of a continuum, right? If you view it as a continuum, maybe with one on each side, you know, the world needs both of those. And I think where churches and people get into trouble is when they're not balanced and not centered. Now, nobody's going to be right in the middle, right? We're all going to lean one way or the other. But if you're completely on one end or the other of this spectrum, you know, it's almost a psychosis, right? It's almost like, you know, you're denying the other half of reality.
Right.
And
Yeah.
back to the situational thing, it kind of depends on what's going on, right? Like you said, if I'm not at peace with myself, I can't go out and do very effectively. And I think that's where a lot of the pastors of these big mega churches that have private jets and things have kind of screwed up, because how right with themselves and with God can they
Wait,
possibly
Kevin
be?
and I can't have a jet? Because that was part of my contract.
As long as it's not a
Wait
private
second,
jet.
I'm pretty sure I was promised one of
Yeah.
those. I need
That
to
was
look
kind of what when I came to Riverbend, I was banking on that.
But you have
Like-
some of these guys that, even though they may have
Got
started
nervy.
out very
Okay, yeah.
good Christians and very right with God, they have come to embrace an area that is not of God.
Yeah, and that's kind of what I'm getting at a little bit. I think my experience, like I said, I grew up as a pastor's kid, and then, you know, been a pastor and just been in this world where I've seen a lot of the denominations and a lot of different kind of movements of church. Like, we're doing it this way now, and it leans more introspective or holiness type of thing. And then there's the missions movement on the other side. We're going to go, and obviously went part of that too. And there ends up being kind of like, you see the extremes of it. You know,
Yep.
that are kind of throwing rocks at each other a little bit. Like, hey, I got to do it this way. We're going to bring peace this way. We're going to bring peace this way.
I think humankind kind of tends to extremes.
Yes, it does.
Right,
I
and
mean,
it's-
we are
it's
like
that-
mired in that right now,
Yeah.
right? It's just extreme,
But I think
extreme,
that's
extreme.
right. You have to. This is what I do, but I'm gonna come back to, you have to be hearing from God yourself as to what is right for you. I think that was the purpose of the retreat when Jesus took it, was like,
Yeah.
he didn't always go toward the crowd. He often went completely out of his way for one woman because that was what the Father told him to do. And he said, I do what the Father tells me to do, and I don't depart from that. And it often didn't look like what we would think the Father would want him to do.
Right.
Like it says in Proverbs, right, there's a way that seems right to a man, and in the end it leads to death. If you're going only off what you think seems right, and you've lost the Father in that, you could be dead wrong. And you've got to just be constantly retreating to engage in order to keep
There's
his
a movement back and forth
vision
of it,
for
yeah.
your life.
I like that. I like that a lot.
Well,
So,
and in fact, you know, if you look in I just, because I did a little class on this, you know, a lot of times he was either retreating before
An engagement.
an engagement or retreating after an engagement, right? And the way I see that, being a more kind of retreating kind of person myself, is, you know, I have to recharge after I go and do something that is very, you know, kind of interactive-y. So some of that is coming from that, right? But in the same thing, I think you were talking about churches, you know, going one way or the other. That's one of the things we like about Riverbend, is we can do both,
right.
right? And
There's options.
and we're big enough that you can engage when you want to engage and pull back when you don't want to pull back. And, you know, me not going and handing out meals doesn't cause that to fail, right? Because you have people that can take that load.
Right.
And people don't judge
Although-
you when you have a.
That's right.
Brian would be
temper
like, "We
tantrum.
want you next week," because Brian Rosson's just built that way. Shout out to Brian.
By the way,
We all need volunteers, so
Yes.
that's
Oh,
the missions
sorry,
guy.
Sorry to cover that.
No, go ahead. Go ahead.
No, I was just going to say, you mentioned Jesus in this time when we treat before and after. That was pre-green room, I'm pretty sure. Green rooms back then.
Well,
Before and after the event. The way you were saying it like it was a show.
I was telling this to you guys earlier, and this is how the movie plays out in my head about Paul in Athens when he's sitting and wrestling and debating with the Epicureans and the Stoics. He ends up talking about an unknown God. He's like, this is that, and great kind of scenario. There's nothing like real about this. This is just how I would make the movie. So don't take it as like legitimate scripture or anything else. But in my head, I could see in the movie, like if I was going to script it, Paul would start talking about Jesus' Sermon on the Mount, which is all these different things that, blessed are you this, blessed are this, and some of the scriptures. But that sermon ends with this little piece from Matthew 5, where he says, "You have heard that it was said, love your neighbor and hate your enemy. But I tell you, love your enemies and pray for those who persecute you, that you may be children of the Father in heaven." A bunch of other stuff. But in my head, I have this idea, kind of in a macro way, that Paul would be saying to these guys, okay, yeah, you're debating if this is the way to find peace, and maybe this is the way to find peace. And there's all these things we wrestle through how we should do society. And in the end, he's kind of saying, hey, there's this thing above that, this idea of loving your enemies and praying for people who persecute, like this extreme love, if you will, that comes from Jesus that you've been talking about, that kind of is over all of that, that encompasses both a Peter and a Paul, that encompasses both of the Epicurean and the Stoic, and finds some sort of yin and yang tension and balance in that somehow. But the kind of glue to that is this love. That's the piece that I think Jesus does bring in that scripture, which is kind of, that's how it play out in my head. I don't know if that's really true, but I think that's the kind of what you were pushing at towards that. Jesus kind of, this is the punk rock part of Jesus for me, is that he blows up both those things.
Well, and I think it's like, when you take a copy of a copy of a copy of a copy of a copy, and it just, the message degrades because it's not the original, right? It's not the source. So man's interpretation of man's interpretation of man's interpretation of man's interpretation of God's word is necessarily going to be less clear and probably more narrow, right? So you end up with people believing these narrow things because they can't see the totality of it because we're such limited beings.
Which is why the Sermon on the Mount flipped their whole world on its head.
Totally did.
Because here comes this breath of fresh air who's saying everyone's got it wrong. The Pharisees and the scribes who are telling you what it is have it wrong and have missed it. And you say you can divorce your wife like this. I say you think about a woman in this way and you've committed adultery. I mean, they're all falling on that. And then all the people have been marginalized and outcast and not ever clued in. And he's like, I'm calling you blessed. And I'm saying that's what he brought to that was, I think, exactly hundreds and hundreds of years of people losing the way and losing the power and losing the authority. And here comes somebody who completely, but if you didn't hear his voice in that, if you didn't have ears to hear, you could have easily been like a Stoic, being one of the first people to yell, crucify him, because here's this radical, it didn't look like we thought it would look. It didn't look like we thought.
So are we still living in a world where people are maybe wrestling out how to find peace? Maybe they lean Epicurean or they lean Stoic, but we still maybe sit in the middle going like, maybe there's something outside of all that.
Well,
and to your point about the church is about, hey, we got the jets now, and the helicopter, maybe a helicopter.
I think I was promised a helicopter as part of this gig.
Like, is there a purity to this kind of concept that, in my head, how Paul would present it to the Epicureans, like this love of God, this love of the Creator that comes through Jesus, is way, way bigger than all of those things. That's the ultimate peace right there.
And I think, this is something I used to tell when I was a Boy Scout leader. I used to tell the kids, it's like you can't use your ears and your mouth at the same time, right? You can't listen and speak at the same time. And I think as a society, especially in the modern day, we have people that are so intent on speaking that they can't hear.
Yeah.
right? And I think that's
Yeah.
that's part of, not certainly not the whole problem, but that's part of what's wrong in the world as a whole today. Is you have people that are so bent on telling you what they believe that they're not going to take the time to listen to what you believe.
What's the quote? Preach the gospel at all times, and when necessary, use words.
Yeah.
St. Francis of
Is
Assisi.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So, yeah, I think the church is missing that. I mean, as soon as the church thinks it's right in its own eyes, but has lost the love as the trump card,
Well,
I think we're
Yeah.
walking down a really dangerous road because you could miss him in that. And
Right.
One of the other things I used to tell my kids is character is what you do when no one's looking,
Right.
right? And I think that's another thing we've kind of lost is, people are showboating and showing off, but even organizations are not walking with character. They're not being with character.
Huh. Yeah.
So I
Go
want
ahead.
to go back to this passage because I think it's beautiful. Again, this Jesus that you talk about, Stephanie, says, "You have heard that it was said, love your neighbor and hate your enemy. But I tell you, love your enemies and pray for those who persecute you, that you may be children of your Father in heaven." This is a very, very difficult thing for people to do in this day and age. And I think the implication that you're making, Aaron, is this is a path to peace.
I am.
This is very difficult for people to do right now. If you're out there listening, raise your hand if this is difficult for you. We can see
It
your
is.
hands.
I think we're
It is.
bombarded.
I'm no good at that at all.
It's interesting because I think we're bombarded from both a religious standpoint, from a political standpoint, from a geographical standpoint, that it's very us and them. It's like, this is my thing over here, and this is, and different levels of enemies. I mean, enemies is a strong word that I think socially we struggle saying they're my enemy, but it's really hard to not look at all the divisiveness around our country and other places and not go, that kind of feels like you're saying that you're enemy. I mean, and this
But
is
I think
such a
so-
hard statement. It is a pathway to peace for me.
Yeah.
So hard, but I think that's the pathway to peace.
I think it comes back to self versus other too, because if you reduce Epicurean and Stoic down to that, my personal tranquility versus the greater good, it's a similar issue we have with, I think, our inability to love our enemies. I feel like it's the darkest parts of ourselves, like those deep, dark parts that feel personally affronted by their difference or by them not doing it my way. And it's only in that sort of sacrifice of self that you can get the freedom to love somebody where they are without it feeling like a personal affront.
Yeah.
Part of what makes people so rail against the enemy or rail against the opposite is that it seems somehow to undermine your position.
Your needs, your value,
Yeah.
something that you hold.
Yeah.
You can't be right because that would make me wrong.
And
And I
That's from a
don't.
law perspective, right?
People, I think well, at least that's how I see it.
Yeah.
And so I think
people
it's hard
view it
to-
as a zero-sum game, and it's not.
Yeah.
Right? We can both be right. Right? We can both be partially right. And people
People hate that.
people hate that,
It-
right?
it
In
feels
order
horrible
for me
when I hear that.
Yeah.
in order for you to be
you-
right, yeah.
Like, I hear we're both right. I'm like, no, we're not both right. You suck, and I'm better. Like, that's what's going on.
Can it be 51-49 at least?
Yeah, come on. Even 0.5%. Can I get 0.5%?
Well, 51-49 is fine. Where people fall into the trap is it's all or nothing, right? In my way or the highway, we can't both have points here. And I think from a government perspective, I think that's when government works really well, was when we both agree this is important. We just maybe disagree on how important, right? But when you run into a situation where I can't let you win because that means I've lost, I don't see how you get government
there's
done that
that
way.
self-
So how do this is weird, but how do we do this in 2021 in the current state of what it is? Because it's hard, it's messy. Like, I think that's part of the journey that I've been on is this pathway to peace. I keep calling it that. Like, what's the pathway to peace for us corporately? Which I do think has a personal element. I think I tend to come from more of a corporate and then go to the inside, and maybe the stoic in me and the extrovert in me. Who knows? Like I go.
I think they're very much aligned with that. I really do.
For sure.
I
Like
really do.
I go that route, but how do we get that to where? Because I feel like there's just a lot of noise, just a lot of noise, and that part to me is very important. I don't know how to get that out to everybody.
The problem is you can't push a string.
You can't push a string.
You can't push a string.
Dig into that because that is an awesome saying right
so
there.
if you push a string, it just bunches up. If you pull a string, you can make it move. So I had a boss who used to tell me that you can't push a string, and what that means is we can't make them behave.
Right.
Right. There's only one person in the whole world whose behavior you can really control, and that's yourself. Right. So however much the other person's behavior may upset you, you can't fix that. Right? All you can do is approach them with love and remember in the back of your mind that what you do when no one's looking is what your character is. So whether you love them or not, right, treat them with love. You know, I don't think as flawed humans we can really love our enemies. I just don't think that's possible. But however much I may despise your position on whatever, or your behavior or whatever, to the extent where I can prevent you from harming me, why don't I just treat you with love?
Right. Yeah.
Wise words.
Very wise words.
John Jolet.
So is this completely a grassroots movement?
It has to be from the bottom up.
Has to be.
Has to be.
You agree with that?
I mean, we can lead by example, but you can't make people change their behavior.
So that's what Gail Gibson, Gail, it's good to see you, was saying. It says it starts in your heart. And then Frank's out there with us. Frank says he feels like he has peace within, but he's not seen a lot of outward peace. So I think he's referring to maybe from other people. I'm not sure. Or maybe he's saying he has peace within. It's difficult for him to transmit that.
Yeah, for sure.
But so then what's the responsibility to engage? Let's say you have perfect.
That's what he wants to get to.
Yeah, like,
that's
but
his point.
You've got to at some point, right?
Let's mix it up. Let's get in there.
If I have perfect peace and I just decide that one of my convictions will be when approached by someone I disagree with, I will love in return. That still allows me a lot of room to not be
antagonistic or perpetuate.
Well, I was going to say influencing the world to be better. Is that putting my light on a hill?
Well, I think the way we personally, my wife and I, try to do this is by finding pain and finding injustice and working on those things, right? I think point solutions. In my wife's case, it's medical missions and missions in general. I'm a little bit less engaged than that with her. I was not brought up in the church, right? So I came to it long after we got married. So I have a little bit more of a mechanical approach, right? Because it wasn't inculcated when I was very young. So it's more of a rote kind of learned response. But I think if you choose not to pass by injustice, then you're doing the right thing.
See, this is where I get all fired up, right? Because I'm take it down right to the real part of it. Like when I think about child sex trafficking, and I think about what's going around our world, there's no way that I'm gonna be like, they're just gonna figure it out. No, I'm like, we're gonna get people together. We're gonna go bring peace.
Dude, you went right there. That's like the toughest one.
I don't think
anybody goes, yeah, that's okay. No, I mean that's
and
just so dark and so awful.
Call it the stoic in me, whatever, the extrovert Italian. I'm going in. I'm going in the fire.
Do you have Italian
I do
heritage?
have it's fiery. It gets ugly. I'm going in. I'm gonna grab as many people as I have, and I'm going in.
Yeah,
and
well,
all
I
my
have that
missions
hard.
folks are like, yeah, let's do it. Like literally. I have a hard time, like, being quiet. Like, solitude that you talk about it's tough for me. But, man, I find peace when I'm together with other people and we're like, we're taking this hill and we're going to bring peace to this situation. And there's an adrenaline rush to it. There's but it's driven by, we're going to bring peace to this situation. We're going to rip people out of places we have to, whatever you got to do. Like, people get fired up about it. They get going. Like, all the guys that volunteer down here in South Austin,
Yeah.
and East Austin, they're like, we're feeding people. We're gonna look at poverty and people who don't have food in their belly. We're gonna do this. So there's that part of us that gets going that I don't know if you guys can tell me wrong, because this is all I know. It feels sacred to me. It feels
You're wrong. No.
Yeah, let's fight about it, right? The stoic in me is like, let's go.
But I think a person's issue is gonna differ from person to person,
For sure.
right? And sometimes that's due to their background, their own experience growing up or whatever. And I think there are certain absolutes, right? And that's kind of one of them,
Yeah.
right? That you don't do that. The reaction to that is, I think, going to be metered by your experience
For sure.
and your gifts and your temperament. But that goes back to the choosing not to walk past injustice.
Right.
Right. I think that's something that talking about the flipping the tables in the temple, right?
Yeah.
He's not going to walk past that injustice, and it's okay.
Isn't that our responsibility to not?
Absolutely.
overlook injustice?
Yeah, absolutely.
In case
Okay,
you
well,
can't
can I
hear,
play
Jake,
devil's
he's
advocate
Voice
here?
cries out in
Our
the desert from
responsibility.
Jake over here.
Yeah, right. Okay, all right. But then my just lawyer side wants to say,
This is good.
how do you? There are thousands and thousands and thousands of causes that we are effectually walking past because you cannot engage with them.
You
This
have
is an
to
example.
prioritize. You have to prioritize.
Well, so then I think it's too simple a statement. You cannot walk by injustice.
But what is the injustice that triggers you, right? That's what I'm saying.
Well,
Everybody's
that's where I
reaction
come
is gonna
back
be
to. You
different.
have to get with the Father because you have a calling on your life, and
Yeah.
you'll walk past a crowd, get to one person if that's who He says you're reaching today. But I think if you decide, I will not walk past an injustice, then you will give your life to a cause
Totally.
and wear yourself out, possibly.
I'm going to tell you a story that may help you with that a little bit.
Okay, yeah.
And you
Enlighten me.
You kind of just set this up for me very well, so
Okay.
I'm going to have to step in this place because this is right in my world. But so there's a concept in mission when you go into, and I've done this a lot, you go into a place kind of assessing what's going on,
Yeah.
or you're drawn to something because of a network, whatever else. There's this idea, real common in like Christian mission stuff, about looking for the person of peace, which is kind of what we're talking about, that there's a sense that, okay, there's a person of peace or some kind of connection point, and that can come through a network thing, it can come through some sort of experience, it can come through whatever, but in the kind of like just massive hurt and brokenness and everything else, it's hard to make those decisions. I think it's we're kind of hearing from God and the Holy Spirit and wrestling that. There's a person of peace that you can find, like, this is it. This is where we kind of start putting our stakes down and starting doing some work here. That person of peace may be someone different for another group, whatever else. I think to me this is where it gets the idea of churches like doing this together and working together and doing that, because you and us we see, but God I think has a calling for us as a community that says we want you to do that, and there's a process we go through to wrestle that out. That makes sense, because it's hard. Like when you start saying, I'm like, that's you. And if you're watching, you may be one of those people. I get emails and phone calls from like, you need to do this, and you need to do this, and it's whatever their causes that they found as injustice. And I'm going, yeah, that's good, and that's good, and that's good. But where is the person of peace? Where is it that God really wants us to go and be? Because that's when all the sacred momentum, beautiful stuff I think happens. But that is like so hard in the world we have right now.
It's like, what is your Good Samaritan experience where you couldn't not stop? You have to stop.
And that's going to be different for everybody, right? So
Yeah.
you can't boil the ocean. You can't fix all of the things, and you can't save everyone, but you can save this one, right? You can save this one. My family, El Salvador, is one of the things that we've chosen as our thing, right? We're going to go do this. It's not the only country in Central South America with problems. It's maybe not even the worst.
It's
if you
the
think about it.
tiniest, actually.
It's the tiniest, right? But that's kind of what we've latched onto as a family that we're going to go do. and that's fine. And if you want to go do Zimbabwe or what, that's fine. And I think one of the things that I know I've talked to Aaron about is as a church having the breadth of offerings to help people go engage, that they can find the thing that triggers that emotion in them, right? Sparking their joy, as Marie Kondo says. Yeah. And you've got to find that thing, recognize that thing, and then go do that thing. I think where people run into trouble is if they see the ocean and they go, well, I can't fix that, and so they do nothing.
Do you find peace? Is there peace both you personally and corporately when you go to El Salvador and hang with your crew?
Yeah.
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 Why?
Well, I think we've been doing it long enough that we know what we're doing and what we're getting into and all that. But the first time Katie and Kelly went down, it was the kids, at the school, and then I think what we find in that particular place is an acceptance and a joy of whatever it is we happen to be able to offer at that time.
Yeah.
Right? And I think we've, as a church, been pretty careful to go and help and not go and do, right? Which I think is important. But it's going to be different for different people. We've gone down there with people and they're like, yeah, it's okay. But it didn't really,
Right.
It didn't really trigger that response.
Right.
So maybe there's another area that, maybe it's, like you said, feeding the hungry here in Austin. That's awesome, right? There are enough opportunities that I think it's important that people understand that go try some things and find something that you connect with, and then go do that and make that the best.
I love that.
I want to suggest that if anybody wants to help out with the Kevin Hedges helicopter pad fund, that could be their thing.
Kevin, the pad is easy. It's the
pad's
helicopter
easy?
that's hard.
You can put the pad on top of Home for Hope. We got space for it. Little elevator up there.
Helicopter fundraising effort.
Yeah. That's not what we're doing. If you're just joining us, this is not a helicopter
I'm a
offer.
bad person.
This will give a little shout out to some of our missions guys. Like, if you're here maybe the first time, go to our website. There's lots of places to help out and be a part of things, from feeding people here to when we can go back after COVID to traveling again, those types of things. Definitely the stoic in me, the engagement, obviously loves those pieces. But there's such a rich conversation around these two sides and these two things, because I think you're definitely drawn, it seems like, maybe more to the Bible study and the growth and the connect, which is what we need, right? Because you're part of women's Bible studies and Zoom calls now, right?
I'm a
deeper journey.
But for Jesus, I am a introvert. Like,
you
books
are
behind my laptop. Nobody sees me.
Right.
Spiritual practices as well.
Spiritual practices off by myself.
Right.
Yeah.
Right.
No. Engagement is. It's funny because God keeps putting me in jobs that require it. But
He's telling you something.
I don't know.
The engagement side is going, come on.
Sometimes, he takes me kicking and screaming. But I think even with prosecution, I mean, I'm not confrontational. I feel like my words trip me up. I don't want to be in that space where it's adversarial. But I always found, and it's this really cheesy quote actually from a little girls movie, because I have two little girls, but it has really influenced me, which is courage is not the absence of fear, but the belief that something else is more important. And I just always ended up having something that was more important than my personal feeling about this. So like you were talking about kid sex trafficking. Mm-hmm. I actually, when I went into my job, didn't want to do any child abuse cases. I was pregnant with my first girl at the time. I very much wanted to walk by the injustice. That didn't sound comfortable to me. That wasn't the best kind of case to try. You never had evidence. It was just a mess. It was a hot mess. And God just kept, there was a woman there named Brandy Bailey who ended up being like one of my best friends, who had been working in India, kicking down doors and working for IJM and rescuing these girls out of brothels. And she handed me a book called Terrify No More, about the guy who founded IJM, and I didn't even read it. I handed
Tell
it back
people
to
what
our
IJM stands for. so they know.
International Justice Mission.
I knew what
They're
that was. I
fighting
wanted to-
slavery internationally in some of the roughest places.
Yep.
Didn't even read the book, y'all. I mean, I handed it back like, oh, I'm pregnant. It's like not anything I want to do right now.
I'm pregnant. We ain't doing
And
that.
I don't want to read about girls getting, thank you. And God just kept, there was this one trial that her partner pulled out at the last second. I'm always somebody who will show up. You know, if you need help, I'm going to show up. And God I showed up for that one case, and that was that was my career for the next
Right.
5 years, because there was just something always more important. And there was an actual kid's face that you put on a file, and of course you're going to take that one to trial, and then you're going to meet the next kid, and you're going to take that one to trial. You're not
Right.
going to leave that kid without an advocate. And then
Started this thing.
yeah,
for you,
and then
huh?
this like non-confrontational introvert was, arguing her butt off for these cases, and confused because it really wasn't my personality at all. But I was Peter.
Yep.
God just was like, now I make you this, and
Right.
that's what I've been doing. And then I tried to go back to my life, a single mom, and Pastor Dave was like, I don't know, and Pastor Diane, I don't know. There's always something more important.
Yeah.
And in my world, and Kevin, you and I've had this conversation, Jesus is that. So you don't really want to, I don't want to be an introvert.
Yeah.
It's just who I naturally,
Right.
how
Right.
I lean. My books are my friends, and I just think it's,
My books and my friend. That's you, Kevin.
I'm right there.
Kevin's right there.
My whole family is the same way.
yeah,
Yeah.
it's just my happy place.
So, is there part of this of us as a faith community beginning to respect and embrace both sides of that and what that means to us, like the power, the exponential power that comes from that? Do we? Because
Yeah.
tonight, as I sit and talk with you guys, I see the beauty of both these sides of the Epicurean, the Stoic, and how they play out in this faith community to bring peace, both internally and even corporately.
Yeah.
But that is the hard. I think in our faith community is sometimes the hard part, because we're broken and we get all like, peace has got to be my way. It's got to look like this. Do you guys experience that within the church world, and lack of respect in those things?
I don't, I guess I'm going to say this weird. Because I'm mostly here with Kelly,
Yeah.
I think she's kind of a hard one to walk up and disrespect.
Yeah.
So I think I don't see that too much.
Yeah.
Right. But I definitely think that we've got to combine both of those, right? We've got to find that middle ground where we take a little bit of each and kind of meld them in. In any time we stop doing that, we start sliding toward one end or the other of the spectrum, and then we kind of lose the point.
Yeah. Yeah, for sure. What do you think? You feeling that too?
Yeah, I think, well, like I said earlier, I think you see Jesus just reflected in all of it.
Right. For sure.
I think his spirit's in all of it, in the tension of it, and I just see him.
Well, when you say tension, I think particularly in the New Testament scriptures, even the Hebrew scriptures, they're comfortable with the tension. They're comfortable with the tension of both those things. I think as Americans, sometimes we're not comfortable with the tension. We tend to be an all or nothing, like you said earlier. We're all this or we're all this. It's got to be my way or this. We can't both be right. Conversation we had before.
Yeah, but
It's
if there
really
weren't
tough.
tension, you would not be able to carry a cup without spilling it.
There. He's got
You're
these great
full
one
of
like
these, aren't
he's
you?
like
Yeah.
rolling.
I'm still stuck on you can't
I would-
boil the ocean. I'm going, really? No boiling
And you
the
can
ocean.
write them down.
Hey, I want to mention that we have Scott Reeves on talking about, as the mission chair, he's encouraging people if they need to get connected. He's a person to reach out to. And I think Pastor Abraham is on as well. So shout out to you, Pastor
Yay,
Abraham.
Pastor Abraham. If you don't know Pastor Abraham, he's a phenomenal pastor in East Austin Reconciliation Church, one of our partners that we work with. And he does some amazing ministry, leadership, and other things too. So part of the beautiful tapestry of all the ministries are working together. It's really, really amazing. Well, you guys, I have just loved this conversation. Thank you so much for being a part of this. We're going to continue to talk about peace and different angles of it. And tonight was really, really good. I hope if you're watching and maybe your first time watching, thanks. Go back and watch some of the other episodes and kind of get connected with this. But I really hope that we continue this conversation within our different places, with our crew in different places, because I think there's something there about bringing the church together to really be effective, to see this movement continue to move forward. And I think that's my desire, your guys' desire too. And I just really appreciate it. Thanks, Kevin, for all you're doing. Jake,
Yeah.
thank you for who's on Hymn Sing tomorrow night.
Dang it, Carlton! I'm so sorry. I forgot to ask you today. I spent 45 minutes with him today. Well, actually, a lot longer than that.
Listen,
I
if
forgot.
you're gonna watch the Hymn Sing, it's gonna be good because Carlton's really
You'll
good.
see. I tell you what you can do. Go to Facebook right after we're done here, and we usually post something. Carlton will tell you about who the guest is and what's going on at Hymn Sing, and usually I've got that down. But
And this week we're back at church, and we'd love to have you there, either live or online. Either one of those two things. So thanks again, guys. Thanks for being here tonight.
Yeah.
We'll see you guys soon.
This was fun. Thanks.
It's really great.